That Christmas, I had to work a double shift in the ER while I was at work. My parents and sister told my 16-year-old daughter there was no room for her at the Christmas dinner table. She ended up driving herself home and spent Christmas alone. In a quiet house, I didn't make a scene. Instead, I responded with action. The next morning, a letter appeared on their doorstep and the yelling began. I got home just before midnight on Christmas Eve, completely exhausted. I'd spent the last hour doing chest compressions on a man who insisted he was just tired. Even though his skin was turning blue, it had been that kind of shift. So when I saw Abby's boots by the front door, my first thought was that someone must be hurt. Then I noticed her coat tossed on the armrest, her overnight bag still zipped, and her body curled up on the couch in that tight, uncomfortable position, like she didn't quite trust the furniture. I just stood there, trying to make sense of it. She was supposed to be at my parents' house for their traditional Christmas Eve overnight. She had begged to drive herself this year, her first Christmas with a new license. Proud and eager to show she could handle it. She even left early to be extra respectful. Since my husband and I were both working late, the plan made perfect sense until it didn't. Abby, I called out softly. Her eyes opened instantly, as if she hadn't actually been asleep. Hey, she said quietly. Why are you here? She asked, slowly sitting up. They said there wasn't any room. I blinked. Room for what? At the table, she replied. Her voice cracked in the middle, and she tried to cover it with a shrug, but it didn't work. They said they weren't expecting me. Too many people were already there. Grandma said she couldn't. Just add another chair at the last minute. She looked stressed, like I was making her night harder. But you got there on time, right? Yeah, right on time, she said with a dry laugh. Grandma opened the door and looked at me like I'd shown up to the wrong party. Abby paused for a moment before continuing. She said there wasn't a bed left either. That was the second excuse. She claimed they didn't want me driving late at night, but also didn't know where to put me, so I just left. I stared at her. Did anyone offer to drive you home? Nope. Did they at least let you eat? She shrugged again. The table was full. Lily was in my usual seat. Grandpa was chatting with her like she was someone special. No one really looked at me. Then Grandma said it's just a full house this year, and Aunt Janelle nodded along. So I left. Her eyes flicked toward the coffee table. I made toast. I followed her gaze and saw it. A single slice of toast on a paper towel. It was cold, and a little bent, with half a banana sitting next to it. That was her Christmas dinner. I felt something twist in my chest. It wasn't quite rage yet, just that brittle, frozen feeling that happens right before something breaks. I wasn't that hungry anyway, she murmured. Not really. That's when her eyes began to fill with tears. She fought it. God, she tried. She looked up, blinked hard, and bit her lip like she could chew her way out of the emotion. It seemed like I'd imposed, she whispered. Like showing up after everything was planned was rude. And then she cried, quietly and slowly, like a faucet you can't quite turn off. I was going to bring a pie, she added, but I thought they'd have enough food. Already, I sat down next to her and put my arm around her shoulders. She leaned in without hesitation. As if she'd been holding herself up out of sheer stubbornness, after a while, she wiped her nose on her sleeve. I know they don't like you, she said. But I thought, ... She cut herself off. You thought we're just the kid, not part of it. She nodded. They didn't even say it meanly, she added, just like it was a practical problem. Like I was a folding chair they didn't have space for. I didn't go to bed right away. I sat in the kitchen, looking. At her bag still zipped. She had packed it so carefully. Picked out a sweater my mom had said she liked. I brought a little tin of cookies she'd made herself. I opened the fridge. There was nothing special inside. I hadn't planned for an alternate Christmas. Why would? We trusted them. That was the part I couldn't get over. Not the cold, cheesy toast or the lack of food. Not even that she drove home alone in the dark. It was that they looked her in the eyes, this sweet, awkward, brave girl who showed up on time with cookies and a smile and told her, with 28 people inside, there's no room for you. They didn't mean the following morning my husband came home while Abby was still asleep. I told him what had happened. He stood in silence for a long moment before finally asking, "So, what are we going to do?" I didn't answer right then, but deep down, I already knew. There's a difference between turning the other cheek and turning away a 16-year-old who only wanted to feel included. They chose the latter. I didn't make a scene. I responded with action. The next morning, my parents found a letter on their doorstep, and that's when the shouting began. I can't quite recall the first time someone called me the weird one. It probably happened before I even understood what the word meant. When I was 6, I found a dead bird and asked if I could dissect it, not because I was trying to be creepy, but because I genuinely wanted to see how it worked. My mom slapped her hand on the kitchen counter and snapped, "Jesus, Kate, what's wrong with you?" My sister Janelle screamed and immediately told everyone I was trying to create a zombie. I ended up grounded for scaring her. That pretty much set the tone. I adored anatomy books, asked for a microscope one Christmas, and talked about blood flow during dinner. At school, I was the kid who actually raised her hand in class. In my family, that was all it took to earn the label of show-off. No one else in the family pursued college. Most didn't even finish high school on their first attempt. I was the only one studying during commercial breaks. By the time I was 12, my dad had started joking, half joking, that I wasn't really his. To be mine, he'd say, you'd have to like beer and hate books. Then he'd let out a chuckle. Once I overheard him arguing with my mom late at night, thinking I was asleep. He asked if she'd ever cheated on him. He said he always had doubts because I didn't look like anyone else in the family. That night, I barely slept. I never brought it up. Still haven't. By the time we reached high school, Janelle had fully embraced her role as the golden child. She was loud, charming, and had average grades. But she was a master at spinning every setback into a story people loved to hear. She could cry on cue and made a point of telling everyone she looked out for her poor, awkward sister who just didn't get jokes. She used to call me Dr. Freak in front of anyone who would listen. When I actually became a doctor, she started calling me Dr. Moneybags. So, some progress, I guess. When I landed the full-ride scholarship, my parents barely reacted. There was no cheering, no embrace. My mom just asked who I thought I'd end up marrying, since guys apparently don't like women who outshine them. I told her maybe I'd marry myself. She didn't laugh. They never gave me a dime. I waited tables all through med school, took the graveyard shifts no one wanted, and came home with blistered feet and burnout etched deep into my bones. But to my family, I was living the dream. They never once came to visit. Years later, after finishing my second residency, I finally secured my first stable job, the one that made me feel, for the first time, like I wasn't just trying to keep from drowning. My husband and I met during an overnight shift, very romantic. If you find shared exhaustion, romantic can eventually move to a place where we could afford more than instant noodles. And that's when the calls started. Can you help with the electric bill? Can you co-sign this lease? Can you talk to a doctor friend about Uncle Pete's back lump? I did what I could, most of it without hesitation. When my parents were approaching retirement way too early and with zero savings, I stepped in. They had never owned a home. They always rented. Bad credit, bad luck, whatever the excuse of the year was. So I bought a modest 2-bedroom house and handed them the keys. I told them it was a gift and that I would handle the mortgage. The house is in my name, but they live there like it's theirs. Rent and utilities are covered more often than not. Medical stuff. I have insurance access. Yes, I never said no until recently. A few months ago, Janelle called. Lily, her daughter, the one who can do no wrong, had been accepted into a prestigious STEM summer camp. She's got your brain, Janelle said, like it was a compliment. This could change her life. I asked how much it cost. $2,200, she said. But it's worth it, and you, of all people, ... That's where I stopped listening. Abby never went to a summer camp like that. Not because she couldn't. She just never asked. She's practical and thoughtful. She wouldn't. Told Janelle no. Politely but firmly, I said I was already covering our parents' mortgage, medical bills, and emergencies. I suggested maybe she could apply for financial aid or a payment plan. Her tone changed fast. Wow, must be nice to have everything. And still be so stingy. She's your niece. You're just jealous because Lily's actually going places. That last one was funnier would have been if I hadn't heard my mom mutter something similar a week later when she thought I was out of earshot. Apparently, I was holding Lily back, just like I always held Janelle back by being the smart one who made everyone else look bad, by existing. I didn't fight it, didn't explain, didn't justify. I just said no, and I meant it. That was 3 weeks before Christmas. Abby was excited to go to Christmas dinner. She said she felt grown up being trusted to drive herself there. She packed an overnight bag and even wrapped small presents for the younger cousins. I told her I'd see her in the morning and reminded her to text me when she arrived. She did, and everything seemed fine. Hours later, I walked through our front door and discovered that Fine had apparently been canceled. Abby looked up from the couch with a wobbly smile that said, "Please pretend this isn't a disaster." She told me in the smallest voice that Grandma had murmured, no space at the table or anywhere else, even though she counted 28 chairs and used a math problem with only one variable. I listened. I let her explanation thud around the room like a dropped suitcase. Then I wrapped my arms around her and let the quiet do the talking. She fell asleep, still wearing the sweater she'd picked out to impress them. When the house finally settled down, sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the spot where her Christmas dinner should have been. I replayed every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every just this once. Katie, that had become forever. They hadn't run out of room. They'd run out of gratitude. And they'd used my daughter to send the memo. That was the moment the switch flipped. No more explanations. No more polite negotiations. I didn't even bother deciding if I would act, only how soon. We didn't speak much on the drive over. My husband sat beside me in silence, his hand resting lightly on my knee, like a grounding wire knot, comforting. Exactly, but solid and present. That was enough. The morning after Christmas always has that weird, fuzzy quiet, like the world is still hung over on sugar and wrapping paper. I was hoping the house would be empty. It wasn't. There were still 2 extra cars in the driveway. Recognized one as Janelle's. The other probably belonged to a cousin who had stayed late for leftovers. We got out. I held the envelope tight. I hadn't slept the shift, the scene with Abby, the cold dinner plate on the counter that still hadn't been cleaned up. It was all humming in the back of my brain like a blown fuse. I rang the bell and waited. No one came. I rang again and knocked. Nothing. "Let's just leave it," my husband said gently. I stood there for a second longer, then nodded. We walked back to the car. I tucked the envelope carefully against the door frame where it wouldn't blow away. I was opening the driver's side door when I heard it. The creak of the screen. Slippered footstep. I turned. My mother stepped out, wrapped in one of those fuzzy robes she always wore during the holidays, the kind she used to brag about getting for 90% off. She bent down, picked up the envelope, opened it, and started reading. Her face went blank, then pale. Then she screamed, "Frank." Her voice cracked like a snapped wire. "Frank, get out here. It's throwing us out." My dad appeared at the door in yesterday's clothes. What the hell? Janelle followed, still in her Christmas pajamas, clutching a mug like she thought this was going to be a cozy morning. What's going on? My mom turned and pointed down the driveway like I was a stray animal that had just pissed on her porch. "You ungrateful little..." We got in the car and pulled away before I could catch the full sentence. Didn't matter. I knew all the greatest hits. By the time we got home, my phone was already buzzing. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. The sixth time I picked up. "How dare you?" my mom shrieked. No, hello, no pause. Not even a fake concern for Abby. "You've lost your damn mind." I held the phone away from my ear. I could still hear my dad yelling in the background. "If you do this, you're no daughter of ours," he bellowed. They didn't ask why. They didn't ask what happened. They didn't even mention Abby once. I hung up. They kept calling. Janelle started texting. Think one message actually said, "This is going to ruin your reputation. Think of your career." Oh. "Honey, my patients don't care where my parents live. By evening." My phone looked like it had gone through a breakup. 14 missed calls, 3 voicemails, a dozen texts. One cousin even had the nerve to message, "Not my place, but this feels extreme. You only get one mom." I didn't answer any of them. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole. Of course it was my mother. She was standing on my porch in that same fuzzy robe, holding the eviction letter, now crumpled and damp, as if she'd been squeezing it for 2 hours straight. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She didn't wait. "You're really doing this?" she hissed. "After everything we've done for you?" I let that hang for a second. Then I said quietly, "You mean the house I bought for you? The bills I paid? The health coverage I arranged because your Medicare didn't cover your blood pressure meds?" She flinched for a millisecond, then straightened, her eyes sharp. "We raised you, gave you everything. You didn't even let my daughter eat dinner." I said, "Thathanon, I swear this part felt like theater." She ripped it in half. She just stood there and tore it down the center as if that would somehow void the legal process. "There," she said. "That's done now. If you want us to forgive you, you'll pay for Lily's science camp and drop this ridiculous tantrum." She smiled, like she'd just solved the whole thing. I didn't say anything because that was the moment I realized they hadn't taken me seriously. Not for a second. Not when I was a kid. Not when I became a doctor. Not even now. To them, I was still the awkward, science-obsessed girl who should be grateful for scraps and stay in her place. The girl they resented but never truly respected. They thought I wouldn't follow through, but they were wrong. So I let my mother walk off the porch, muttering to herself like the hero in a tragic play, and I closed the door quietly, calmly. But in my head, I was already making the next move. My mother tore up the eviction letter like it was a flyer for gutter cleaning right in front of me. Right after accusing me of being selfish, loveless, and emotionally unstable, she had the nerve to smile and say, "Pay for Lily's science camp and we'll forgive you. We'll forgive you," she said, as if they were the victims. As if turning away my daughter at Christmas was some sort of lapse in etiquette instead of cruelty. 2 mornings later, I met with a lawyer. Laid everything out, the house in my name, the mortgage I'd been paying for 7 years. The bills, the dental plan, the quiet sacrifices. He didn't flinch. "I assume you want a formal eviction?" he said, as if it were the weather. I nodded. The notice went out that same week. 60 days, paper stamped, signature acquired. And this time they couldn't tear it up and pretend it didn't exist. I kept paying the mortgage. I wasn't about to let my credit die for the sake of a statement, but everything else was gone. Utilities, cable, medical reimbursement. Weeks later, someone knocked on my door. It was Aunt Elaine, the good aunt, or so I'd thought. She had a tin of cookies and a rehearsed look of concern. "Kate," she said, "I just want to talk." I let her in. I already knew why she was there. We sat in the kitchen. I poured tea, but neither of us touched it. It just doesn't sound like you, she started. "Throwing out your parents over a misunderstanding," she added gently. I laughed once, not kindly. I told her about the house, the bills, the Christmas Eve betrayal, how my parents had made room for 28 people, including a neighbor and 2 cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade, but not their own granddaughter. "Aunt." Elaine paled. "I didn't know," she said. "They didn't tell you," I corrected. She left like someone who couldn't unhear what they'd heard. 3 days later, I got a text. I didn't understand before, but I do now. 1 week before the deadline, my lawyer called. They haven't moved at all, he said. Then we proceed, I responded. That same day, I put the house on the market, priced it fairly, not inflated. I wasn't looking to squeeze out every dollar. I just wanted to be done. A buyer made an offer quickly. Families love that neighborhood. They only had one condition. The place needed to be completely vacated. Vacant possession required, my agent reminded me. Understood, I said. I didn't go on the day they were removed. The new owners handled it through official legal processes. From what I heard, it wasn't pleasant. But what followed wasn't any. Easier, Janelle, of course, took them in. Naturally, my sister has always enjoyed pretending to be the more compassionate one. She gave interviews to our cousins like she was on some kind of press tour. She's abandoning them, she told them, because of one holiday misunderstanding. 3 weeks later, she was standing at my front door, her eyes bloodshot, her hair tied back in a frazzled bun. I can't do it, she said, skipping any greeting. They're constantly bickering. Mom says the living room is too cramped. Dad complains that my kids are too loud. They won't even agree to share a bathroom. I'm losing my mind. I leaned against the doorway, my arms folded. They need a rental, she told me. You could at least help with that. Just enough to cover a deposit. No, Janelle. You saw them turn Abby away on Christmas Eve and stood there doing nothing. That was your choice. I nodded slightly. This is mine. She blinked, hesitated, then turned around and left without another word. A week later, she kicked them out as well. They ended up in a rental nobody would brag about. 2 small rooms, 1 space heater, and a crooked front step that leaned like a shrug. Their pensions barely covered the basics, just rent and groceries. The vacations were gone, the dinner parties were over, the anniversary cruise they'd been planning was forgotten. They started reaching out to the extended family, trying to gain sympathy. They claimed I'd abandoned them without notice, said I was unstable, cold, always had been. But by then, I had already spoken to the uncles and cousins quietly. I sent them proof, scanned bills I had covered, a copy of the eviction letter properly time-stamped and certified. One cousin simply replied, "Wow." Another sent a thumbs-up emoji. No one was rushing to rescue them, and I wasn't either. 2 months later, Abby and I were sitting on the porch, sipping iced tea. No plans, no pretending, just a peaceful afternoon. She said, I don't miss them. Neither did I. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I opened the message without thinking. Hope you're proud of what you've done. I deleted it instantly. No hesitation, no reaction. They'll probably text again, Abby said offhandedly. They always do, I replied. But they're not my problem. Anymore. And they weren't. They once said there wasn't room for Abby at their table. Now there's no room in our lives for cruelty, control, or manipulation. Fast forward 2 years. They're still living in that crumbling rental, still pointing fingers at everyone but themselves. Abby, she's thriving, studying what she loves. The money from the house sale went beyond just covering tuition. It gave her peace and gave me a piece of closure. I don't return their calls. I don't send support. I don't lose sleep. I protected my daughter. I chose her at long last. But tell me, did I go too far or just far enough? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell.